there is a secret hiding inside one of the greatest comedies ever made, and it has nothing to do with the jokes. It has nothing to do with the outrageous dialogue, the boundary-pushing satire, or the fourth-wall-breaking finale that left audiences completely speechless in 1974. The secret is quieter than all of that. It lives in the pauses, in the stillness, in the eyes of a man who barely raises his voice across the entire film. Millions of people have watched Blazing Saddles dozens of times, quoted it at dinner tables, and debated its legacy in film classes, and yet the single most important element holding the whole thing together has gone unnoticed for decades. Gene Wilder himself pointed to it before he passed, and once you understand what he was actually doing on that screen, you will never watch this film the same way again. Most people remember Blazing Saddles as a loud movie. And in many ways, it absolutely is. It is a film that crashes through social taboos like a runaway stagecoach, delivering punchline after punchline with the confidence of a filmmaker who had absolutely nothing to lose. Mel Brooks was swinging for the fences with every scene, and the result was something that permanently changed what American comedy was allowed to say and how it was allowed to say it. But here is what gets lost in all the noise. The reason the film actually works, the reason it holds together as something more than a collection of shocking gags, is because of one man who decided to do almost nothing. Gene Wilder, playing the Waco Kid, made a choice that was so counterintuitive, so quietly radical, that most audiences absorbed its effect without ever identifying its cause. He chose stillness in a film built entirely on chaos. And that choice saved everything. To understand why Wilder ended up in Blazing Saddles at all, you have to go back to the very first day of production, because things fell apart almost immediately. The role of the Waco Kid had originally been given to Gid Young, a well-regarded actor with an Oscar to his name and the kind of dignified screen presence that seemed perfect for an aging, world-weary gunslinger. On paper, Young was the obvious choice. In reality, the situation unraveled within hours of cameras rolling. Young arrived on set visibly unwell, struggling with the physical and psychological effects of severe alcohol withdrawal. By mid-morning on that first day, he had collapsed. Production came to a complete stop. Mel Brooks was standing on a Western set with a cast ready to work, a studio breathing down his neck, and no one to play one of the film's most important roles. Brooks did not hold auditions. He did not call an agent or schedule a meeting. He picked up the phone and called Gene Wilder directly, and the conversation that followed says everything about the kind of person Wilder was. According to Brooks, Wilder did not ask for the script. He did not ask about the pay. He did not ask for a character breakdown or a rehearsal schedule. He simply said yes, and he was on a plane the next day. That kind of trust, that willingness to show up without a safety net, is rare at any level of the industry. But Wilder was not just being generous. He was being exactly who he had always been, someone who cared more about the work itself than the terms surrounding it. When he arrived on set, jet-lagged and walking into a role he had never prepared for, he was already thinking about how to play the character. And the decision he made was not what anyone expected. Wilder made one demand before stepping in front of the camera. He told Brooks directly that he was not going to play the Waco Kid for laughs. In a film overflowing with absurdist humor, slapstick, and performances pitched at full volume, Wilder insisted on doing the opposite. He wanted to play the character straight, with restraint, with something close to genuine melancholy. This was not the instinct of someone trying to be difficult or contrarian. It was the instinct of an actor who understood something fundamental about how comedy actually functions. Contrast is not just a tool in comedy. It is the engine. Wilder recognized that if everyone in the film was pushing the absurdity to its limits, then the one character who refused to do that would become the most powerful presence in the room. By pulling back while everyone else leaned in, he would not disappear. He would become the gravitational center of the entire story. And that is exactly what happened. Watch the scene where the Waco Kid first appears, slumped in a jail cell bunk, barely lifting his head to acknowledge the new sheriff who has just arrived. There is no performance in it, in the traditional comedic sense. Wilder is not mugging for the camera. He is not timing a reaction for applause. He is simply being a man who has given up, and he is doing it with such specificity and such quiet commitment that it stops the scene cold in the best possible way. When he finally speaks, the words land harder because of everything that preceded them. The stillness does the work. The pauses carry the weight. And the audience leans in, almost involuntarily, because something about this man in this film feels unexpectedly real. What Wilder was doing with the Waco Kid was not just a comedic technique. It was an act of genuine character building. Beneath all the surface-level jokes and dry one-liners, he was constructing a portrait of a man in real psychological pain. The trembling hands that the kid explains in that jailhouse scene were not played as a gag. Wilder treated them as evidence of trauma, as the physical manifestation of a life that had gone wrong in ways that could not be easily fixed or laughed away. The alcoholism was not shorthand for comedy. It was a genuine wound. When the kid describes being the fastest draw in the West, there is no pride in his voice, only a kind of exhausted regret, as though he is confessing something he would rather forget. Mel Brooks later said openly that Gene brought an emotional intelligence to the role that was never written into the script. That intelligence is what separates a great performance from a memorable one. There is also the matter of what Wilder brought to the set when the cameras were not rolling. The production of Blazing Saddles was genuinely stressful. Beyond the creative ambition driving every scene, there was constant tension between Brooks and the studio, with Warner Brothers executives repeatedly pushing back against the film's unflinching racial satire, its profanity, and its willingness to make audiences deeply uncomfortable. Multiple memos circulated calling for rewrites, toned-down language, and the removal of scenes that addressed racism too directly and too honestly. Brooks held his ground, but he needed people around him who believed in what the film was trying to do. Wilder was one of those people, and his support was not passive. He actively encouraged Brooks to protect the film's edge, to resist the pressure to sanitize the satire into something palatable and toothless. Wilder understood that the discomfort audiences might feel was not a problem to be solved. It was the point. Satire that does not make anyone uncomfortable is not satire. It is decoration. His willingness to stand behind the film's most provocative choices reflected something Wilder spoke about throughout his career, the belief that comedy, at its best, is one of the most honest art forms available to us. It can say things that straightforward drama cannot. It can expose hypocrisy, challenge power, and confront prejudice from an angle that reaches people who might otherwise shut down entirely. Blazing Saddles was doing all of that, and Wilder recognized it. He was not simply there to collect a paycheck on a favor for a friend. He was there because he believed the film mattered, and he was willing to put his credibility behind that belief at a time when the studio was actively trying to pull it apart. The behind-the-scenes stories from the production also reveal something wonderfully paradoxical about Wilder's work. For all his emphasis on restraint and stillness, his delivery was so precise, so unexpectedly perfect, that it constantly broke the people around him. Crew members who were supposed to be maintaining professionalism during takes would dissolve into laughter. Camera operators could not hold steady. Sound technicians had to step away. Even Mel Brooks himself, according to multiple accounts, had to be physically removed from the set on certain days because his laughter was loud enough to ruin the audio. The lines Wilder delivered were not designed as obvious punchlines. They were dry, quiet, almost casual observations that landed so perfectly because of everything he built around them. His famous description of the townspeople as simple farmers, people of the land, the common clay of the New West, people who simply happened to be, in his words, morons, was reportedly one of the most difficult scenes to complete simply because no one could keep it together long enough to finish a take. The irony is rich. A performance built entirely on restraint caused more chaos behind the scenes than almost anything else in the film. Something else happened during the production of Blazing Saddles that has shaped the course of film history in ways people rarely connect back to this particular Western spoof. During downtime between takes, Wilder began sharing an idea with Brooks. It was not a formal pitch. It was a casual thought, the kind of creative wondering that happens between two people who trust each other enough to think out loud. Wilder asked what it might look like if the grandson of Dr. Frankenstein wanted nothing more than to escape his family's legacy entirely, to deny and distance himself from everything the Frankenstein name represented. Brooks, consumed by the demands of the film already in production, was initially dismissive. But Wilder believed in the idea enough to write it down, to develop it into a proper draft, to do the work without any guarantee that it would go anywhere. When Brooks finally read what Wilder had written, he changed his mind immediately. That idea, born in the pauses between scenes on the set of a Western comedy, became Young Frankenstein, one of the most beloved and carefully crafted horror comedies ever committed to film. Without Blazing Saddles, without the creative environment Brooks and Wilder built together on that set, it is entirely possible that film never gets made. The question of Richard Pryor adds another layer of complexity to the story of this film and what it might have been. Pryor was deeply involved in shaping Blazing Saddles as a writer, and his contribution to the script's voice, particularly its unflinching honesty about race in America, cannot be overstated. He was also originally intended to play Sheriff Bart, the role that ultimately went to Cleavon Little. Studio executives, citing concerns about Pryor's public profile and personal struggles at the time, blocked the casting. It was a decision that altered the film's chemistry permanently. Gene Wilder later reflected on this openly, noting the chemistry he and Pryor had demonstrated in later films like Silver Streak and Stir Crazy, and wondering what that partnership might have produced if it had started here, in this story, several years earlier. The question of how Wilder's quiet sadness might have played against Pryor's explosive, crackling energy in Blazing Saddles remains one of those genuinely haunting what-ifs in cinema history. What is certain is that even without appearing on screen, Pryor's influence runs through the film's bloodstream. His voice is in the rhythm of the jokes. His perspective is in the sharpness of the satire. Cleavon Little gave a remarkable performance, but the emotional architecture of many of his best scenes was built by Pryor at the writing table. What Wilder's performance ultimately reveals about Blazing Saddles is that the film's lasting power comes from a tension most people never consciously identify. On the surface, it is a movie about excess. It takes everything, the Western genre, racial politics, Hollywood conventions, the very idea of a coherent film narrative, and pushes it past its breaking point. But beneath that excess is a film that is genuinely feeling something. The satire has a moral seriousness underneath the jokes. The characters, even the absurd ones, exist within a world that has real stakes. And the reason audiences can feel those stakes, the reason they are laughing at something that also makes them think, is because Gene Wilder is standing in the middle of it all, completely grounded, completely human, quietly holding the emotional thread that stops the whole thing from flying apart. Decades later, film historians and critics who have returned to Blazing Saddles with fresh eyes have increasingly pointed to Wilder's performance as the work that has aged best. The broader jokes, the most outrageous set pieces, remain exactly what they were: funny, shocking, and deliberately provocative. But Wilder's moments are the ones that deepen with time. They reward the viewers who slow down to actually watch what he is doing with a line, with a pause, with a look across a room. His work in this film was eventually recognized as part of why it was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, which does not preserve films simply because they were popular. It preserves them because they are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Wilder's contribution helped Blazing Saddles qualify on all three counts. What Gene Wilder finally helped people understand about this film is something that applies well beyond comedy. The loudest element in the room is rarely the most important one. The performer who pulls focus by pulling back, who creates space rather than filling it, who trusts silence as much as dialogue, is often doing the most essential work of all. In Blazing Saddles, surrounded by brilliant chaos and boundary-breaking humor, Gene Wilder chose to be still. He chose to be real. And in doing so, he gave the film something it could not have manufactured any other way: a beating human heart at the center of all that beautiful madness. That is what most fans never figured out. That is the secret hiding in plain sight. And now that you can see it, it is impossible to unsee.